Close your eyes if you'd like, or simply let your gaze go soft, resting on nothing in particular. Let your body settle wherever you are. Let your shoulders drop. Let your hands rest open and still. There is nothing you need to do right now, nothing to hold on to. For the next little while, you are simply here, listening and resting. Tonight, we are going to a temple in Japan, a quiet one, surrounded by old trees in the province of Kozuke, in what is now Gunma Prefecture, north of Edo, in the part of the country where the mountains come down close to the plain, and the air in the early morning has a particular quality of stillness that belongs to places that have been inhabited for a very long time and have settled into their own silence. The temple is called Morin-ji, a Zen temple of the Soto school, founded in the 15th century, its buildings low and quiet among the pines, its garden the particular kind of Japanese temple garden that is not ornate but simply composed, gravel and stone and moss and old wood, the elements arranged not to impress, but to invite a particular quality of attention, the kind that notices the sound of wind in the pine needles and the quality of light on an old stone surface in the late afternoon. This is a story about a tea kettle, or rather, it is a story about what was inside a tea kettle, and what happened when the truth of what was inside could no longer stay hidden, and what followed from that revealing in the way that things follow in the old Japanese stories, unexpectedly, gently, with a quality of resolution that feels less like the ending of a problem, and more like the settling of something that had been waiting to find its right place. Breathe in slowly, and let it out. Let the day go. There is nowhere else to be tonight, but here, in this quiet temple, listening to the wind in the pines and the sound of water being brought to a boil. A morning at a Zen temple, before the birds, before the light. The monks rise in the dark. This is one of the constants of monastic life in Japan, the rising before dawn, the beginning of the day and the darkness that precedes the day, and they move through the temple in the particular way of people who have made the same movements so many times that the movements no longer require thought, that the body knows where to go and how to be before the mind has fully woken. The first thing is zazen, sitting meditation, the practice of simply sitting in the zendo, the meditation hall, on the cushion, in the particular posture, and being present in the way that the practice asks for, not thinking about what happened yesterday or what will happen tomorrow, not planning or remembering or imagining, but here, in this body, in this hall, in this dark breathing, the bell is struck, the sitting begins. Then, as the light comes, as the dark outside the shoji screens begins its slow shift from black to deep blue to gray, the day unfolds in its sequence. Morning service, breakfast, work. The work of a temple is the particular kind of work that accumulates in a place where many people live and practice. The cleaning and the cooking and the maintenance of the buildings and the garden, the preparation for the ceremonies that mark the passage of the days and the seasons and the years. In the kitchen, the fire is lit, water is brought from the well, cold water, the cold of the morning, carrying in it the particular quality of water that has been underground and has come up through the stone into the early light. The water is poured into the kettle is placed on the fire, and the day, for the monks of Morin-ji, begins with the sound of water beginning to warm, the soft sound, the matsukaze, the wind in the pines, and the particular quality of attention that arises when there's nothing to do but wait for the water to boil and be present in the quiet of the morning. The abbot of Morin-ji had a fondness for tea, not unusual for a Zen monk. Tea and Zen have been intertwined in Japan for more than 800 years, the practice of tea and the practice of meditation growing up together, each informing the other, so that the careful attention required to make tea well and the careful attention required to sit well have come to feel like two expressions of the same thing. The abbot appreciated his tea kettles. He had several, each one different in shape and weight and in the particular sound it made when the water inside began to move toward boiling, and he knew them well, the way a person knows the particular qualities of things they have used every day for a long time. One morning he came across a tea kettle at a market. It was old, older than the others he had, with the particular quality of old iron that is not rust exactly, but a deepening, a darkening, the surface of the metal, having taken on over many years a color and a texture that new iron does not have. It sat among the other objects at the market, with the stillness of something that knows what it is, and is not trying to be anything else. He bought it and brought it back to the temple. He set it in the kitchen and asked the young monks to clean it and prepare it for use. The young monks began to clean it, and that was when the trouble began. Not dramatic trouble, not the trouble of things falling apart, or of clear wrongness announcing itself, but the quieter trouble of something not quite right, something slightly off, something that made the young monks look at each other, and then look at the kettle, and then look at each other again. The kettle seemed warm, not the warmth of metal that has been in a sunny room, not the warmth of an object that has absorbed heat from its surroundings, but a different warmth, a warmth that seemed to come from inside the kettle, from something inside the kettle. Morin-ji. The temple exists. This is worth saying clearly. Not all the temples and folk tales exist. Not all the places where stories are set can be visited today. But Morin-ji is real, standing now as it stood in the time of this story in the city of Tatbayashi in Gunma Prefecture, its buildings low and quiet among the old trees. It was founded in 1426. In the middle of the Muromachi period, in the time when the Ashikaga shogunate was beginning to lose the firm hold it had once had on the country's governance, when the culture was producing the great No theater and the tea ceremony and the rock gardens that are still the images that come to mind when people think of Japanese aesthetic. The founding abbot was a monk called Dairin Shoto, and the school was Soto Zen, the form of Zen brought to Japan by the monk Dogen in the 13th century, the school that emphasizes shikantaza, just sitting, the practice of sitting in meditation without a specific goal, without the koan, the paradoxical question that the Rinzai school uses, but simply sitting, simply present, simply here. The temple is known for Tanuki, the path that leads to its gate, the kandao, the sando, the approach to the sacred space, is lined with Tanuki statues, 21 of them, each one different, each one in a different posture, carrying a different object, expressing a different quality of the Tanuki's particular kind of presence, and they stand along both sides of the path and watch the visitors approach with the expression that Tanuki statues have, which is the expression of creatures that know something amusing and are deciding whether to share it. The tea kettle is there too. The actual tea kettle, or what is said to be the actual tea kettle, is kept at the temple as one of its treasures, a connection between the story and the place, between the thing that happened once and the thing that continues to be. Not all temples keep their stories in this way. Not all places make themselves so available to the tales that grew up around them. But Morin-ji has embraced its Tanuki, has made the strange old story part of what the temple is, part of how it presents itself to the world. And there is something appealing about a Zen temple whose most famous story is about a raccoon dog in a tea kettle walking a tightrope. When they placed it on the fire, the kettle began to change. First, a head, a small round head, emerging from one side of the kettle with the tentative quality of something testing whether it is safe to appear. Round ears, bright eyes, the pointed nose of a tanuki, a raccoon dog, looking out from the iron body of the kettle with an expression that contained, in equal measure, alarm and dignity. Then, feet, 4 small feet, appearing at the base of the kettle, each one no larger than necessary, the feet of a small animal that had been, until recently, successfully concealed inside a tea kettle, and was now finding that concealment was no longer possible. Then, a tail, the full round tail of a tanuki, extending from the back of the kettle with the particular quality of something that is both embarrassing and impossible to retract. The young monks scattered. This is understandable. A tea kettle that sprouts legs and a head, and a tail, is not something that the training for monastic life specifically prepares you for, and the response of the young monks, backing away rapidly, making the sounds that people make when they encounter something outside the categories of their experience, was entirely reasonable. The abbot came. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen and looked at the tea kettle that was attempting to leave the fire on its 4 small feet, its head turning from side to side, with the expression of a creature that is deeply uncomfortable, but does not know what to do about it. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he said, "Take it away," not angrily, not with the emphasis of a person who's been wronged or frightened. Simply, take it away. He had been a Zen monk for 40 years. He had sat with many difficult things. A tanuki in a tea kettle was unusual, but the instruction remained the same. Acknowledge what is there, and decide what to do next. What to do next, in this case, was to remove the kettle from the temple and find someone else to deal with it. The tea kettle, iron kettles for tea, tetsubin and jigama, have been made in Japan for more than 500 years, and the craft of making them developed over those centuries into one of the refined arts of the Japanese metalworking tradition. The great centers of iron kettle production were in the Tohoku region, the northeast of Honshu, the main island, where the particular qualities of the local iron and the local water and the particular techniques developed by the craftsmen of the region produced kettles that were known throughout Japan for their quality. Nanbu iron, from the area around Morioka, became particularly famous, its kettles recognizable by their texture, the small bumps on the surface called hailstone pattern, a rare, that are both decorative and functional, increasing the surface area of the kettle and helping it retain heat. The making of a cast iron kettle is a precise and demanding craft. The mold must be prepared, the clay shaped and dried to the exact form of the kettle, inside and out, and the iron must be heated to the precise temperature at which it becomes liquid and pourable, and then poured into the mold with the kind of care that leaves no room for error, because liquid iron at the moment of pouring is not something you can adjust once it has been set in motion. The kettle that the abbot bought at the market was old. Old iron has a quality that new iron does not have. The surface has darkened and deepened, the various uses of its history inscribed in its texture, the scars of old fires and the mineral deposits of old water, and the handling of many hands over many years, all contributing to the particular quality of its presence. An old kettle is not simply older than a new one. It is different. It contains, in its surface, the accumulated evidence of everything it has been through, all the fires, all the water, all the hands. And this makes it, in some sense, more itself than a new kettle can be. The Tanuki was wise to choose an old kettle. Old things are harder to get rid of. They have too much presence to be simply thrown away. There was a man who dealt in old things, not a merchant exactly, not someone with a shop and a reputation and a clientele who came to him for specific things they were looking for, but a dealer in whatever came his way, old iron, old wood, the various objects that households accumulate and eventually need to be rid of, the things that have outlived their usefulness in one place and might find it again in another. He was the kind of person who appears in Japanese folk tales as a supporting figure, not the hero, not the villain, but the person who appears at the right moment and does the thing that moves the story forward without drawing attention to themselves. He happened to be passing the temple that morning. The abbot, standing at the gate with the problematic teakettle wrapped in cloth, saw him coming down the road and called out. The dealer stopped. The abbot explained, briefly, simply, the way of a person who does not want to get into details, that there was a kettle that he no longer wished to keep, that it was unusual, that the dealer was welcome to it if he wanted it. The dealer looked at the wrapped kettle. He looked at the abbot. He had been in his trade long enough to know that when someone is giving something away, rather than selling it, there is usually a reason. But he also knew that the things people most want to be rid of are sometimes the things that turn out to be most valuable. He took the kettle. The scrap dealer's world. In the cities of Edo period Japan, there were people who made their living from what other people no longer wanted. The kuzuya, the scrap dealer, the rag and bone man, moved through the streets with a call that everyone recognized, announcing his presence and his willingness to take whatever households needed to be rid of: old iron, old paper, old cloth, the accumulated debris of lives being lived and things being used, and the ordinary ongoing process of things wearing out and being replaced. This was not a glamorous occupation. It placed the dealer in the lower levels of the merchant class, below the established shop owners, below the craftsmen with their workshops and their specializations, in the category of people who made do with what came to them rather than building something of their own. And yet, there is a freedom in this position that the more settled positions do not have. The scrap dealer moves. He is not fixed to a shop or a workshop, not bound to a clientele that expects him to be in the same place. day after day. He sees the city from the outside, from the position of a person who passes through rather than stays, who encounters the city as a series of doors and exchanges rather than as a settled neighborhood where everyone knows everyone and the days repeat. He was, in other words, the kind of person who might encounter a talking tea kettle and take it home. The settled, rooted people, the people with reputations to maintain and positions to protect, would have been more likely to find reasons not to, but the scrap dealer had nothing to protect and nowhere to be, and a curiosity that had been cultivated by years of encountering whatever the city produced and finding something in it that was worth having. He took the kettle, and in taking it, he changed both their lives. That night, the dealer set the kettle on a shelf in his workroom and went to bed. He was tired. The particular tiredness of a person who has been on their feet all day, moving through the city, carrying things and acquiring things and carrying them somewhere else, and he fell asleep quickly in the way of people who are tired enough that sleep does not require effort. He was woken by a sound, not a loud sound, not the sound of something breaking or someone at the door, but a quiet sound, the kind of quiet sound that wakes you precisely because it is quiet, because it does not fit into the category of the sounds that the night is supposed to contain. He lay still for a moment, listening. The sound came again, from the shelf, from the direction of the kettle. He got up. In the workroom, in the low light of the night, the kettle was different from how he had left it. It had a head now, and feet, and a tail, and it was looking at him with an expression that he would later describe to the people who asked him about it, of whom there would be many, as the expression of a creature that has been waiting for the right person to arrive. The Tanuki spoke, in a voice that was neither loud nor soft, a conversational voice, the voice of a creature that has something specific to say and intends to say it clearly. The Tanuki introduced itself. It said, "I am the one called Bunbuku Chigama." It said, "I was being chased and I hid in the form of a kettle, and now I find that I cannot fully change back." It said, "I am not dangerous. I am not here to cause trouble. I am simply here, in this form, and I need somewhere to be." The city that would later be renamed Tokyo, the city that is now the largest city in the world, was in the period of this story already enormous. By the 18th century, Edo had become one of the largest cities on Earth. Some estimates put its population at over 1 million people, a city of a scale and density that required its own particular forms of organization and entertainment and the constant negotiation between the different kinds of people who lived there. The Edo Entertainment District, the area that produced the Kabuki Theater and the woodblock prints, and the particular culture of the merchant class that had become, in the Tokugawa peace, one of the most economically powerful and culturally productive forces in the country, was a world of its own. Performers of all kinds competed for the attention and the money of the Edo crowds. Kabuki actors were celebrities. Their images appeared on the woodblock prints that were the mass media of the period. Their performances drew crowds who came back season after season, who had preferences and opinions, and argued about them with the passion that sports fans have in every era. But alongside the major theaters, there were smaller entertainments. Street performers, acrobats and jugglers and people with unusual animals occupied the open spaces of the city. drawing the smaller crowds of passers-by who had a few minutes and a few coins and were curious about what was there. This is where the dealer's stage fits. In the world of the smaller entertainments, the world of the unusual and the unexpected, the world of things you might encounter in passing and remember for a long time afterward. A tea kettle walking a tightrope, it fit perfectly in a city full of remarkable things, a city that had developed a particular appetite for the unusual, a particular willingness to pay for the experience of seeing something outside the ordinary. A tea kettle walking a tightrope was exactly the kind of thing that the Edo crowds had learned to appreciate. The dealer sat down, not because he had decided to, not because he had thought, I will sit down and listen to this talking tea kettle, but because his legs had made the decision for him, in the way that legs sometimes make decisions when the mind has not yet caught up with what is happening. He sat on the floor of his workroom in the middle of the night and looked at the Tanuki in the tea kettle and listened. The Tanuki had a proposal. It said, "You took me in without knowing what I was. You did not throw me away when you could have. For this I am grateful." It said, "I cannot give you gold. I cannot give you the things that the stories usually promise, the buried treasure, the multiplying rice, the wishes granted. But I can give you something else." It said, "I can perform." Perform. The word landed in the quiet of the room with an unexpected weight, not the weight of something heavy, but the weight of something surprising, something that had not been on the list of things the night might contain. The Tanuki explained. It could walk a tightrope. It could dance. It could do the things that the performers of the pleasure districts did, the acrobats and the dancers and the people of skill and entertainment who made their living by doing things with their bodies that other bodies did not do, and it could do these things in its current form, half tea kettle and half Tanuki, which gave the performance a quality that no human performer could replicate. It said, "People will come to see something they have never seen. They will pay. You will be comfortable. And it paused. I will have somewhere to be and something to do, and I will not be put on a fire again." The ability to transform, henge, the changing of form, is one of the oldest themes in Japanese folk belief. The forest creatures of Japan, the fox and the tanuki in particular, were understood to have this ability, the ability to take on a form other than their own, to appear as something else, to move through the human world in disguise. This belief is very old. It appears in the earliest Japanese literature, in the chronicles and the poetry collections of the 8th century, and it has persisted in various forms to the present day. The modern manga and anime tradition, which regularly features characters who transform, who have multiple forms, who are something other than what they appear to be, is drawing on a very deep well of Japanese imaginative tradition, a tradition that has always been interested in the space between forms, the space between what something is and what it can become. But transformation in the Japanese tradition is not always a triumph. For the fox and the tanuki, transformation is a skill, but also a risk. The ability to take on another form is also the ability to lose yourself in it, to become so committed to the pretense that returning to the original form becomes difficult. This is what happened to the tanuki. It transformed in panic, not with the careful preparation of a practiced transformer. and found itself unable to fully return, stuck, in a form that was neither Teakettle nor Tanuki but some combination of both. The iron body, the round head, the 4 feet, the tail, a creature caught between what it had been and what it had become in the moment of its greatest need. There is something in this that is not only about Tanuki, the forms we take on in moments of crisis or fear, the ways we present ourselves when we are trying to avoid something or get through something, can stick, can become, over time, more fixed than we intended, can require someone else, a kind scrap dealer, perhaps, a person who accepts us in our current form, without requiring us to be otherwise, to help us find our way back to wherever it is we are supposed to be. The dealer built a small stage, not elaborate, not the permanent structure of the established performers who had their own theaters and their own reputations and their own crowds who came back season after season, but a stage, a real one, with a rope strung between 2 poles, and a space in front where people could stand and watch, and a small curtained area at the back where the performer could wait. Word spread in the way that word spreads in a city like Edo, quickly and imprecisely, carried by the particular energy of people who have seen something unusual and cannot keep it to themselves. Have you heard? There is a teakettle that walks a tightrope. No, really, a teakettle. The crowds that came had the quality of all crowds that have come to see something they do not quite believe, a mixture of skepticism and hope, the particular combination of wanting to be surprised and preparing not to be. And then the performance began. The Tanuki emerged from behind the curtain in its form, the iron body of the teakettle, the small round head, the 4 small feet, the full tail, and moved toward the rope. And then it walked the rope, not hesitantly, not with the careful, tentative quality of something attempting something difficult, but with the ease of a creature in its element, the ease of something that knows exactly where its center of gravity is and has no doubt about where the next step will land. The iron body of the kettle moved along the rope with a quality that was both impossible and entirely convincing, the kind of thing that makes the watching mind simply accept what it is seeing and set aside, for the duration, the question of how. The crowd exhaled. Then it applauded. Between performances, the dealer made tea, not for any ceremony, not with the elaborate preparation and the specific movements of the formal tea practice, but simply in the way of a person who has discovered that making tea is a useful thing to do when you have time and want to do something with your hands that is not demanding, but is also not nothing. He used the kettle, not the Tanuki kettle. The Tanuki rested in its corner between performances, doing whatever the Tanuki did when it was not being watched, but a different kettle, an ordinary one, an iron pot that had been his for many years, and had the particular quality of objects that have been used daily for a long time, and have become, through use, something more than their function. The kettle sat on the small brazier in the corner of his workroom. The fire beneath it was low, just enough to keep the water moving toward boil without forcing it, the particular level of heat that produces the slow process rather than the rapid one. The sound. The tea masters talk about the sound of the kettle as something to be learned, as one of the things that a person who makes tea develops, over time, the ability to hear. It begins very quietly, when the water is still cold, when the heat from the fire has only just begun to move into the water, there is almost no sound. Then, as the water warms, as the molecules begin to move faster, as the dissolved gases begin to release, there is a sound that the Japanese call matsukaze, the wind in the pines, a soft, sustained sound, like the sound of a light wind moving through the needles of a pine tree at a distance. Then the water begins to move. Small bubbles form at the bottom of the kettle, each one a tiny sphere of steam, rising slowly through the water, and the sound changes, becomes fuller, more present, the bubbles adding their voice to the sound of the wind, and then, finally, the full boil, the water rolling and moving, the sound complete, the kettle saying, "I am ready." The dealer sat with his tea and listened to the process, and found that the time it took, the time between filling the kettle and the moment the water was ready, was exactly the right amount of time to sit and do nothing and let the mind rest from whatever it had been doing. The Tanuki. In Japan, the Tanuki, the raccoon dog, an animal that is native to East Asia and has been part of the Japanese landscape for as long as people have been in Japan, occupies a particular place in the cultural imagination. It is not a fox. The fox, in Japanese folklore, is a creature of intelligence and cunning, associated with Inari, the deity of rice and agriculture, the spiritual force that presides over harvest and fertility, and its transformations are often linked to themes, seduction and deception, the trickster quality that operates with a specific goal in mind. The Tanuki is different. The Tanuki transforms too. This is one of its primary characteristics in the folk tradition. But its transformations have a different quality. Where the fox transforms with precision and intention, the Tanuki transforms with a kind of exuberance, a fullness of commitment to whatever it is pretending to be, a quality of enthusiasm that sometimes gets it into trouble. The Tanuki in the stories is almost never malicious. It plays tricks, yes, and its tricks can cause trouble, yes, but the motivation is usually closer to the playfulness of a creature that enjoys the experience of transformation itself, that finds something delightful in the experience of being other than what it is, rather than the cold calculation of a creature that wants to harm. There's a warmth to the Tanuki in Japanese folklore that the fox does not quite have, a bumbling quality, a tendency to get caught, a quality of vulnerability beneath the transformation that makes it easier to feel something like sympathy. The Tanuki in this story is all of this. It transformed in panic, not in cunning, and found itself stuck in a form that was not quite its own. It was put on a fire and complained about it. It negotiated with a scrap dealer for a place to live and something to do. This is not the behavior of a monster. This is the behavior of a creature that found itself in a difficult situation and made the best of it with the resources available to it, which is, in the end, the behavior of most of us, most of the time. The people who came to watch, they came from all parts of the city, from the merchant districts and the craftsmen's neighborhoods, in the areas near the river where the people who did the physical work of the city lived, and they brought with them the particular quality of attention that Edo crowds had developed for the performances they loved. The Edo audience was not passive. The kabuki theaters, the great stages of the Edo entertainment world, had produced a culture of engagement between performers and audience that was direct and immediate. The audience called out to the actors, praised the moments they loved, expressed their appreciation in the real time of the performance rather than holding it until the polite moment at the end. The smaller performances, the street entertainments, the sideshows, and the novelties. These too had their particular audience culture, the people who came to see knowing roughly what to expect and being surprised anyway, the people who came skeptical and stayed entranced. For the Tanuki's performance, the particular quality of the audience was wonder, not the manufactured wonder of an audience that has decided in advance to be amazed, not the polite enthusiasm of people who have paid for a show and feel they owe the performer their response, but the genuine wonder of people who were seeing something their minds could not quite accommodate. A teakettle on a rope, moving with certainty, the iron body that should have been inert, that had no legs, no feet, no mechanism for balance or motion, moving as if it had always known how to move, as if the rope were the most natural place in the world for it to be. People came back. They brought their friends. They brought their children. They stood in the crowd and watched and felt something that they would later find difficult to describe, something between delight and unease, and the particular pleasure of witnessing the impossible, presented calmly, without drama, as if it were simply what was happening, which, in a sense, it was. The performances continued for some time. Each day the crowds came, sometimes larger, sometimes smaller, depending on the weather and what else was happening in the city and the particular rhythms of the Edo entertainment district, and each day the Tanuki walked its rope and danced its dances, and the people went home having seen something they would tell other people about. The dealer became comfortable, not rich, not in the sense of a person who has accumulated more than they need, but comfortable in the sense of a person who no longer wakes up in the morning with the particular anxiety of not knowing how the day will be provided for. He ate well. He slept well. He went to his work each day with the particular ease of a person whose work has become something other than a burden. But he was also aware that the arrangement had limits. The Tanuki was not a performer. It was a Tanuki, a creature of the forest and the field, a creature whose natural existence was nothing like the existence of walking a rope in front of a crowd every afternoon in a small stage in Edo. He watched it between performances. In the curtained area at the back of the stage, the Tanuki rested, not with the settled quality of an animal at ease, not with the loose, relaxed quality of a creature doing what it is meant to do, but with the quality of something that is enduring, that is doing what needs to be done, but carries in its stillness the trace of what it would rather be doing and where it would rather be. One evening the dealer sat with the Tanuki after the last performance. He said, "You have done enough." He said, "You have given me more than the arrangement required." He said, "I think it is time to return you to the temple." The Tanuki looked at him with the expression that the dealer had come to know, the expression of a creature that is both grateful and trying not to show how much it had been hoping for exactly this. The dealer carried the kettle back to Morin-ji. It was a long walk. Edo to Tatebayashi was not a short journey. and he made it in stages, stopping at the inns that lined the old roads and resting in the evenings with the kettle wrapped in cloth beside him. The Tanuki was quiet during the journey, not unhappy. The dealer had the impression of something that was returning to where it belonged, something that was moving in the right direction, but quiet, the way things are quiet when they have no need to speak. The temple appeared through the trees, the approach through the pines, the path lined with the Tanuki, statues, each one different, each one watching, had the quality of arrival that belongs to places you have heard about but never seen, where the reality and the story exist in the same space at the same time. The abbot came out to meet them. He was the same abbot, older perhaps, or simply more himself, the way people become more themselves over the years rather than less, and he looked at the kettle with an expression that the dealer would later remember as the expression of a person who had been expecting something for a long time and had not been sure it would come. The dealer presented the kettle. He told the abbot about the performances, about the crowds, about the money, and what he had done with it. He brought half of the earnings as a gift to the temple, as the Tanuki had suggested he would, as seemed right. The abbot accepted the gift with the particular quality of acceptance that belongs to people who have learned to receive without the awkwardness of people who have not. He placed the kettle in the temple, not in the kitchen, not where it might be used and heated and made to serve as a kettle again, but in the temple treasury, among the objects that the temple kept not for their function but for what they represented. The kettle sat there, still, quiet. The Tanuki inside it, if the Tanuki was still inside, was at rest, in the place it had started, in the place it had returned to, in the quiet of the temple among the pines in the province of Kozuke, where the mountains come down close to the plain, and the air in the early morning is still. Tea in Japan. The practice of tea, chado, the way of tea, is one of the most developed of the Japanese arts, an art that takes as its subject the making and drinking of a bowl of tea, and finds in that subject a complete world. It came from China, where tea had been cultivated and drunk for many centuries before it arrived in Japan. The monk Aisai, who had studied Zen Buddhism in China and brought the practice back to Japan in the 12th century, also brought tea seeds. He wrote a treatise on the benefits of tea, its effects on the health, its assistance in maintaining the alertness required for meditation, and planted tea in the temple gardens, and introduced the practice of the tea ceremony to the monasteries, where it became part of the rhythm of monastic life. Over the centuries that followed, the practice developed. Sen no Rikyu, the great tea master of the 16th century, who served under Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and who is considered the person most responsible for the form of the tea ceremony as it is practiced today, brought to the practice the aesthetic principle of wabi, the beauty of simplicity, of incompleteness, of things that are rough and imperfect and not trying to impress. The tea house he designed was deliberately small and low. You had to bow to enter, and the objects used in the ceremony were chosen not for their beauty in the conventional sense, but for a different quality. The quality of things that have been used and have aged and have taken on in their surface the record of that use and age. The tea kettle is central to all of this. It sits on the fire in the corner of the tea room, the row, the sunken hearth, and it heats the water that will become the tea. Its sound, the particular sound of water heating in an iron kettle, the small stirring and shifting that precedes the full boil, is part of the experience of tea. The tea masters speak of this sound, speak of learning to hear it as part of learning to make tea, learning to notice the particular sound of water at rest, and the particular sound of water that is beginning to move, and the particular sound of water at the threshold between the two. What does a temple keep? The things that temples hold, the objects in their treasuries, the pieces that are brought out on particular occasions and otherwise kept in the careful dark, are not simply valuable objects. They are connections, connections between the present moment and the time when the object was made, or when the event it represents occurred, or when the person it belonged to was alive. Japanese temples have always been repositories of this kind of connection. The Buddhist tradition brought to Japan, from the continent, the practice of honoring sacred objects, the relics and the implements and the artistic representations of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, and this practice merged with the existing Japanese practice of honoring the sacred in objects, in places, in the natural world. The result is a tradition in which things matter, in which the physical object is not simply a symbol of the sacred, but a place where the sacred is genuinely present, where the boundary between the object and what it represents is thin enough to be almost transparent. The tea kettle at Morin-ji is this kind of object. It is not simply an old iron pot that happens to be associated with a charming story about a raccoon dog. It is the place where the story lives, the physical form that the story has taken in the world of objects, and holding it, or even simply standing near it, gives the story a reality that it would not have if it existed only in words. People still visit. They walk the path between the Tanuki statues, past the 21 of them, each one different, each one watching, and they enter the temple and they feel the particular thing that old sacred places produce, the sense of accumulated time, the sense of many people having stood in this same place and looked at these same things and felt, perhaps, something not entirely unlike what you are feeling now. The kettle is there, still, quiet, ready, perhaps, to be picked up again by someone who needs it. Let it all soften now. The quiet temple among the pines, the abbot and his fondness for tea kettles, the young monks backing away from the small round head appearing at the rim of the iron body, the scrap dealer and his workroom, the tanuki on the shelf, waiting in the night for the right person to be ready to listen, the small stage and the rope and the crowd exhaling as the tea kettle walked it, the dealer's face in the curtained area after the last performance saying, "You have done enough. It is time to go home." Let it dissolve gently, the way the crowd dispersed each evening, moving back into the streets of Edo, carrying in their minds the image of the impossible thing they had just seen, the iron body on the rope, the small feet certain on the single strand, the full tail for balance. There is something in this story for sleep. The tanuki was stuck in a form that was not quite its own, in a situation it had not chosen, and it made of that situation something livable, something even good. It did not fight what it could not change. It found what it could offer within the constraints of what it was, and it offered it honestly, without pretending to be more or less than it was. And when the time came to go home, when the person it had come to trust gave it permission to stop, it accepted. Tonight, let the constraints of the day rest. Let the things that are not quite right, the situations that are not quite what you would choose, the forms that do not feel entirely your own, let them rest. You do not have to solve them tonight. You do not have to walk any ropes tonight. Tonight, there is only this, the quiet and the warmth, and the sound of water somewhere far away beginning, very slowly, to come to the boil. Rest well. Sleep well. Good night.